Back in my college days, I had a buddy whose father owned an expansive 800-acre piece of land in eastern Texas. In the past, the old man used to lease it out to hunters and paper companies, but for some reason, he had stopped doing so. He had built a cozy cabin on the property a few years prior, and he would generously allow use to use it for a break from the academic grind. It served as the perfect retreat, a way to unwind from the pressures of school and immerse ourselves in nature. One memorable spring break in 1997, we decided to load up our trucks and head for the cabin. Our plans were simple: shooting, beers, and all the other redneck activities one could imagine. The first day was spent cleaning the cabin and moving our gear inside. Come evening, we lit a roaring fire outside and indulged in a feast of steaks and fried potatoes. Dessert was skipped in favor of cracking open some beers as the sun dipped below the horizon. As the evening progressed, we found ourselves passing around a joint or two, reveling in the camaraderie of the moment. Sometime during the night, I was roused by a shuffling noise outside. Stepping out to investigate, I squinted into the darkness and thought I saw the silhouette of a man standing completely still. It was unnerving, and despite my intoxicated state, I decided to approach for a closer look. However, before I could get any nearer, my friend's voice behind me startled me. It turned out he had woken up and noticed the open door. Laughing off my concern, he dismissed the idea of a mysterious figure and sent me back to bed. Though, when I turned for one last glance, the shape had vanished. The next morning, I dismissed the strange encounter as a byproduct of a wild night. We went about our activities, fishing, shooting, and the usual redneck pastimes. However, during one nocturnal trip to relieve myself, a snapping stick startled me. The fear escalated when I saw a mysterious man standing behind my friend, staring intensely at the back of his head. This was the same figure I had seen the night before. Frozen in fear, I watched as the stranger turned to me with a blank expression before walking away. My attempts to convey the sighting were met with laughter and skepticism. Things took a sinister turn a few days later when, while hunting wild hogs, we became targets ourselves. Gunshots rang out, and we hastily retreated to the cabin. The assailant seemed relentless, prompting us to flee the property. It wasn't until we returned with deputies that the gravity of the situation sunk in. Bullet holes in the cabin, damaged truck, and missing camping gear. The subsequent investigation suggested a squatter or poacher, but the mysterious stranger I had seen remained unidentified. The trips to the property ceased, and within years, the cabin lost its allure as my friend's dad had a heart attack, and the paper company resumed its lease. To this day, the identity of the mysterious stranger remains a mystery, and my friend and I occasionally speculate about his origins. But when I'm alone, a lingering question haunts me. Is he still out there, waiting for the perfect moment to finish what he started all those years ago?
Growing up, it became a routine for my dad to pick up my brothers and me after school and head into the mountains for an afternoon of firewood gathering. The process was a family affair. My dad would fell the trees, and my brothers and I had the task of rolling the wood to the truck and loading it up. This assembly line continued until we had a truckload of wood, usually before nightfall. Once the work was done, sweaty and exhausted, we'd pile into the truck cab and make our way back down the mountain. Back at home, the next day would be spent unloading, splitting, and stacking the wood into neat rows. This routine repeated until we had gathered enough wood for our home, our grandma's cabin, and even some extra for elderly neighbors. One particular afternoon, we decided to try a different logging road on the other side of the valley. A change of scenery, as my dad put it. This road hadn't been maintained, with large rocks and fallen branches obstructing the path. As we ascended the mountain, an odd feeling began to set in. It wasn't just exhaustion, it was an electric tension in the air, as if the mountain itself was aware of our presence and unwelcoming. My younger brother broke the uneasy silence, expressing that he felt we weren't welcome there. Both my older brother and I nodded in agreement. My dad, seemingly oblivious or choosing to ignore our apprehension, motioned us to continue clearing the path. We pushed forward until we reached a small clearing in the woods, where we finally stopped the truck. Oblivious to our unease, my dad started sawing the wood. However, that ominous feeling persisted, and my brothers and I couldn't shake the sense of foreboding. As twilight set in, my dad unexpectedly told us to load up, cutting the work short for the day. Although the truck wasn't fully loaded, my dad seemed eager to head home. As we descended the mountain, the atmosphere lightened, and we began chatting and cracking jokes. Suddenly, a brown blur jumped from the downslope side of a switchback, and my dad slammed on the brakes. The truck came to a standstill, and we peered through the windshield to find a crumpled deer in the headlights. My dad, cursing the deer's existence, got out to investigate. As my brothers stayed put, I joined my dad. To our horror, the deer was in a state of advanced decay, covered in maggots. The smell was overwhelming, and the scene was a grotesque horror show. Before we could comprehend the situation, a loud shriek echoed from the trees, and branches shattered as something headed up the slope towards us. My dad hastily got back in the truck, slamming the door closed just as the creature reached us. The truck roared down the hill, leaving the eerie shrieking behind as we exited the tree line into the desert sagebrush. Pulling into our property, the truck came to a stop, and we sat in silence, processing the bizarre and terrifying events of the day. My dad, finally breaking the silence, explained that he had felt uneasy all day on the mountain, sensing figures moving in the woods. He had seen shadows and felt a pervasive sense of being watched. The dead deer, thrown onto the road as a trap, was meant to make us stop. He drove downhill with no intention of stopping for anything. We never gathered firewood on that particular mountain again. The Forest Service permanently closed and reclaimed the road, leaving the woods inaccessible by vehicle. The screams in the forest that day will forever haunt my memories, and whatever malevolent force drove us out of those woods made it clear that we were unwanted, and perhaps, in its eyes, better off dead.
The tone of his voice shifted, faster, deeper, agitated. Angry words replaced friendly invitations, and I sensed the malevolence on the other side of the thin trailer wall. I lay frozen, listening to the unsettling tirade, and somehow knew that whatever was pretending to be my co-worker was unusually tall, which explained why I couldn't see it. The night dragged on as the voice continued its sinister chatter. Exhausted from the mental strain, I eventually succumbed to fatigue and fell asleep. The next morning, I shared the bizarre encounter with the crew, but no one else had heard or seen anything. We dismissed it as a product of sleep paralysis or the vivid imagination fueled by the wilderness. It was only after we returned that my captain took me aside and shared his own unsettling experience. A few months earlier, he had been cowboy camping, a practice of sleeping outdoors without a tent, a couple of miles from the fire station. One night, as he lay in his makeshift bed, a heavy drop of mucus landed on his face. Assuming it was sap or owl poop, he wiped it away, but the dripping persisted throughout the night. Disturbed and frustrated, he shone his flashlight and even screamed towards whatever was above him. He moved his bedding to a clearing away from the tree line, but the mysterious dripping persisted. Waiting for dawn, he broke camp and made his way back to the station without ever disclosing his strange encounter to his colleagues. Interestingly, I had noticed that the captain had stopped volunteering for outdoor overnight duties a few weeks before, a departure from his usual enthusiasm for such assignments. The stories remained unexplained, yet at the time, both of us felt an inexplicable connection between our eerie encounters in the depths of the Arizona wilderness. In my youth, I worked as a wildland firefighter in the vast backcountry of rural Arizona, part of a team stationed in the southern end of a forest known more for its remoteness than recreation. The dense wilderness offered few roads and no campgrounds, making any recreational activity a hard-earned reward for those willing to venture deep into the heart of nature. Our fire crew had 2 duty stations, one in town and the other 2.5 hours up a winding, treacherous mountain road. The outpost in the mountains had a unique charm, featuring a fire response building, an old forest ranger station, and a relatively modern double-wide trailer that served as our temporary home. This was more than 2 decades ago, a time when self-service was a distant concept, forcing us to find various activities to keep ourselves occupied during the downtime. The outpost became a hub for camaraderie, with a television for movie nights, horseshoes, and other games around the fire pit. Amidst the vastness of the wilderness, our small community found ways to make the isolation enjoyable, forging connections that would last a lifetime. One memorable night was the 4th of July. We weren't on a fire assignment, but the holiday added an air of uncertainty to the festivities. As we tossed horseshoes, played music, and shared laughter, the night seemed peaceful. The physical training hike scheduled for the early morning kept any thoughts of alcohol at bay, ensuring everyone turned in early. I retired to my small room in the trailer, one of the few with a window overlooking the vast wilderness. As I began to doze off, a voice echoed outside my window, the voice of a coworker still awake. His persistent requests for me to join him outside started innocently enough, but something about it didn't sit right with me. Lying on my side, facing the window, I hesitated. The darkness concealed his figure, and the land dropped off on that side of the trailer, obstructing my view. The more he urged me to come outside, the more a sense of unease crept in. I felt an inexplicable fear, as if opening my eyes would reveal a hand reaching down from above, beckoning me into the unknown.
In the fall of 2019, amidst the turmoil of battling depression, a friend's invitation to go camping in the Davy Crockett National Forest was a glimmer of hope. The first couple of days spent at the Ratcliffe Lake campgrounds were therapeutic, surrounded by the soothing beauty of the forest. Kayaking and hiking became our solace, momentarily providing relief from the darkness that clouded my mind. However, the tranquility was shattered on the 3rd morning when my friend received an emergency call, forcing him to abruptly leave. Left alone, I decided to continue with the original plan and seek solace in the depths of the forest. Armed with a map from the nearest forest information center, I embarked on a journey to find a secluded spot. The dirt road I chose led me deeper into the woods, where the density of the trees increased, casting an ominous atmosphere. After miles of navigating the winding path, I stumbled upon a cluster of campsites. To my surprise, trucks and RVs were scattered around, their occupants immersed in hunting activities. Unsettled by their curious stares, I pushed forward, determined to find a more remote spot away from prying eyes. A few more miles into the forest, I discovered a secluded area at the corner of the woods. There, I set up my tent, ignited a comforting fire, and decided to unwind with a sip of whiskey while burning letters that held the weight of my troubled thoughts. As the night deepened and the woods embraced an eerie silence, I was jolted awake around 1 a.m. by the distinct sound of footsteps encircling my campsite. Initially attributing it to wildlife, my unease heightened when I caught a low cough in the distance, followed by footsteps approaching my truck. Relying on instincts honed by fear, I quietly unlocked my truck and directed my spotlight towards the source of the noise. My shout echoed through the night, revealing a glimpse of someone clad in camouflage attempting to handle my truck's doors. The chilling encounter sent shivers down my spine. Rather than retreating with a light, the intruder sprinted into the impenetrable darkness of the woods, crashing through the underbrush without making a sound. Terrified and shaken, I hastily packed up my camp, leaving behind the remote spot that had turned into a haunting memory. Navigating the park roads back to the main road, I embarked on a 4-hour drive back to my hometown, the feeling of vulnerability lingering throughout the journey. Though the desire to return to the woods remains, the haunting experience has left an indelible mark. If I ever venture back, it will be with friends, and perhaps the reassurance of a firearm, ensuring that the shadows of the forest hold no more chilling secrets.